The roar of the crowd was already deafening when the fighter grabbed the microphone. Sweat shone on his chest under the bright lights as he shouted into the arena, his voice bouncing off the steel rafters. "Chuck Norris! Just an old man from the movies. Tonight, I'll show you how fragile legends really are." The laughter that followed was sharp, almost cruel. A section of the younger audience stood, waving banners with the fighter's name, their chants merging into a rhythmic taunt. Phones lit up everywhere, recording, streaming, multiplying the insult across thousands of screens in real time. But in the opposite corner, Chuck Norris stood perfectly still. No flashy robe, no music with exploding pyrotechnics, no entourage. Just plain trunks, a loose jacket, and that steady walk to the ring that made people lean forward instinctively. No theatrics, only presence. The contrast was brutal. The younger fighter strutted across the canvas, slapping his gloves together, feeding on the noise. Chuck didn't even look at the crowd. He paused at the ropes, glanced once at his opponent, then climbed inside with the same economy of motion he had always lived by. That glance, calm, unhurried, spread a strange silence over sections of the arena. Commentators tried to fill it with chatter. "He's pushing 68. He hasn't fought professionally in decades. What is he doing here?" Another voice cut in. "It's dangerous. The kid's a reigning champion, known for brutal knockouts. This could end badly for Norris." But the older faces in the crowd weren't laughing. Men and women who remembered Chuck from tournament days, from films, from the endless stories told about him in gyms and bars, stood quietly. They didn't cheer, they didn't chant. They just watched, their eyes fixed on the ring. A tension was building, older than the cameras, older than the show. The fighter paced like a predator, jaw clenched, bouncing on the balls of his feet. He threw a few shadow kicks high into the air, making the audience gasp at his speed. He pointed across the ring, lips curling into a grin, then raised his arms, calling for more noise. He got it. The sound shook the air like thunder. Chuck sat on his stool, listening. He didn't shift his shoulders, didn't drink water. His breathing was slow, visible even under the glaring lights. When the announcer called his name, the building shook. Not with the same wild energy the kid commanded, but with a deeper rumble. Fathers lifted children onto their shoulders. Elderly fans clapped with trembling hands. "Chuck! Chuck! Chuck!" rolled from the back rows, meeting the mocking chants of the younger crowd head-on. It wasn't just noise anymore. It was division. Two worlds colliding in one ring. Youth hungry to prove itself, and the myth of a man who never seemed to need proof. The camera cut close to Chuck's face. No smile, no frown, just a steady gaze, almost indifferent. And that indifference felt louder than the insults raining down on him. The kid leaned over the ropes, microphone still in his hand, and barked one more provocation. "This myth dies tonight. Remember this moment, when the legend couldn't keep up." His voice cracked slightly as he forced the words. But no one noticed. The audience roared approval. Everyone except Chuck. He hadn't moved. His hands rested on his knees, fingers loose. Only his eyes tracked his opponent. That calm was infuriating. The fighter threw the mic aside, pounding his gloves together, shouting something lost under the noise. The referee stepped in, waving both men to the center. The lights narrowed, the canvas glowing white against the darkened stands. The sound of the crowd rose and fell, a storm without rhythm. The two men faced each other. The younger fighter was electric, sweat glistening, chest heaving, muscles coiled like springs. His pupils darted, feeding off the audience. He wanted to dominate before the first punch was thrown. Chuck was still. His chest rose and fell in a steady rhythm. His shoulders were loose, his stance relaxed. To the cameras, it almost looked careless. But to the older fighters watching at home, there was recognition. That silence before a storm. That patience sharpened by decades. In one section of the arena, a boy no older than 10 stood up, holding a handmade sign scrawled with thick black marker. "Go, Chuck." His voice cracked as he screamed it, swallowed almost immediately by the wall of chants for the younger fighter. Still, the camera caught it, flashing the boy's hopeful face onto the big screen above the ring. For a split second, the arena cheered, not for the kid in the ring, but for the kid in the stands. Then the referee raised his hand. The crowd hushed in anticipation, every throat tight, every phone lifted higher. "Fighters ready?" he asked. The younger man nodded aggressively, almost before the words left the referee's mouth. Chuck raised his chin slightly, nothing more. And then the gong hit. The sound wasn't just heard, it was felt. Through the floor, through the ribs of every person in the building. The arena erupted into chaos, voices colliding like waves against concrete. The fight had begun, but the story was already something else. A test of myth against muscle, patience against fury, silence against noise. And as the two men moved toward each other under the blinding lights, no one in the building breathed the same way again. Just wondering. Where are you watching from? Write it down, bellow. The gong faded, but the echoes inside the arena hung heavy, as if the sound itself refused to leave. The younger fighter exploded forward, his energy volcanic. He swung his arms loose at first, then clenched his fists and began circling, throwing quick feints, testing. His body language was clear. "I own this ring." Chuck didn't shift his stance. He didn't blink at the feints. He stood as if rooted, eyes steady, breathing slow. That calmness, on a stage where every movement is magnified, spread across the audience like static. People didn't know whether to cheer or hold their breath. The younger man smirked, turned his head toward the crowd, and raised his arms as if asking, "Are you watching?" They answered with thunder. The noise was intoxicating, a drug he was gulping down with every second. Then, stepping closer, he let the referee separate them and leaned into Chuck's ear, though his words were fed through the sound system. "Tonight, I'll end the myth." The crowd gasped. The audacity of whispering an insult directly to a man who had become folklore was shocking enough. But saying it into a hot mic so that the entire world could hear, it turned the insult into a spectacle. One side of the arena erupted into wild cheers, chanting his name, stomping the floor like a drum. The other side answered, older voices shouting, "Chuck! Chuck!" until the walls trembled. For a moment, it felt less like a sporting event and more like two civilizations colliding. The cameras zoomed in on Chuck's face. Still no reaction, no flicker of irritation, no grin, no shake of the head. Just that fixed calm, as though the words never existed. That absence of response made the provocation sting more. The younger fighter wanted fire. He got silence. Silence in front of millions. The commentators scrambled to make sense of it. "He's toying with him," one said. "Chuck's pretending not to hear." But you can't ignore that kind of energy forever. Another voice cut in. "Or maybe he's just above it. Look at him. He hasn't even shifted weight." The kid bounced in place, unable to stand still. His jaw worked furiously, chewing invisible words. He shadowboxed toward Chuck, his punches cutting the air with loud cracks. Every gesture aimed at the crowd, every step exaggerated. He was a performer feeding off applause, a showman disguised as a fighter. Chuck adjusted his stance slightly, barely perceptible. His right foot slid half an inch. His shoulders loosened. His eyes never left his opponent. That was all. And yet the crowd reacted like he had landed a strike. The quiet ones, those who had been fighters themselves, or who had studied him for years, recognized it instantly. They murmured like witnesses to an omen. He's ready now. The younger man tried to escalate, waving Chuck forward, shouting, "Come on! Fight me! Show them what you've got!" His voice cracked at the edges, desperation hiding beneath bravado. He was performing for the crowd, but bleeding insecurity into every syllable. In the front row, the camera caught a child gripping a cardboard sign that read, "Go Chuck." The boy's knuckles were white, his eyes wide. He wasn't laughing. He wasn't cheering. He was staring at the older man with a mixture of fear and faith, as if this wasn't a fight, but a test of whether heroes still existed. The referee moved between them, palms raised. "Save it for the round," he barked. But the younger fighter shoved forward again, chest puffed, smirking like a wolf flashing teeth. Chuck's only answer was to breathe out slowly, his lips parting in what almost looked like a sigh. And then he spoke. Just one sentence, soft but caught by a microphone angled too close. "Respect isn't given. It's earned." The arena froze. The chant died mid-syllable. Even the younger man faltered, momentarily blinking, as if those words had weight far beyond their sound. It wasn't volume that silenced the room. It was the authority behind the voice. For a few seconds, nothing moved. No one in the audience clapped, booed, or shouted. The cameras swiveled uncertainly between the two fighters, unsure which face carried the real story. The commentators whispered now, their voices lowered as if they too had been pulled into that gravity. "That's the first thing Norris has said tonight," one murmured, "and it might have just shifted everything." The younger fighter tried to laugh it off, shaking his head, bouncing again. But the laugh rang hollow. His movements were sharper, jerkier. The provocation had landed on him. In the stands, people began chanting again, but the rhythm had changed. It wasn't youthful gloating anymore. It was older, steadier, rising like a drum beat. Chuck, Chuck, Chuck. The bell rang again, calling them forward. The young fighter shot out of his corner like a storm, eager to erase the weight of that silence. His fists cut the air with fury. But as he closed the distance, Chuck didn't flinch. He stepped forward once, just one deliberate stride, and the noise of the arena swelled like thunder rolling in over the desert. The fight wasn't just about fists anymore. It had become a battle of presence. One man with all the noise in the world behind him, another armed only with silence. And the silence was winning. The bell cracked through the arena, sharp as a gunshot, and the roar of the crowd surged like surf against stone. The younger fighter didn't wait. He stormed forward, throwing jabs, a cross, and a whipping low kick that echoed against the canvas. People rose to their feet, chanting his name, voices layering until it felt like thunder rolling inside the building. Chuck barely moved. His shoulders rolled, his stance small, his weight shifting inches at most. The punches missed by fractions, the kick brushed air. To the crowd, it looked almost lazy, but to anyone who had trained, it was timing carved to perfection. The kids spun a high roundhouse, shin slicing through the lights. Chuck leaned half an inch and let it sail past his face. Gasps burst across the stands, then silence, broken by a wave of applause from the older fans who recognized what they had just seen. The commentators' voices wavered. "Not a single clean shot has landed," one muttered. The other tried to laugh, but it caught in his throat. The cameras stayed on Chuck. searching for effort, and found none. Anger flushed the fighter's face. He barked, "Come on!" and drove a right hand toward Chuck's jaw. It was heavy, certain. Chuck met it with the smallest inward roll of his forearm, letting the force bleed into nothing. Then he stepped once, calmly, into a position that forced his opponent to reset. That step alone drew a cheer. The audience could feel the shift even if they didn't have the words. The kid swung wider, faster, desperate to crack the calm. Hooks, body shots, knees in the clinch. Chuck framed him off with hands like hinges, giving space, never letting the chaos land. The referee separated them, but it wasn't needed. Chuck was in control of the distance without throwing a single strike. Minutes stretched like rope under tension. The crowd's rhythm changed, chants colliding, half screaming for youth, half for the legend. A boy in the front row clutched his homemade "Go Chuck" sign so tightly the cardboard bent. His mouth hung open, eyes locked on the older man who hadn't yet thrown real violence, but already looked untouchable. The younger fighter tried to steal the round with spectacle. A spinning hook kick arced high, phones lit to catch the moment. Chuck stepped through it as if walking down a hallway, his chest brushing fabric, then stood where the kick had missed by inches. He didn't counter. He just let the miss hang there. Heavy. The restraint was louder than any punch. Breathing ragged, the kid glanced at the clock. The camera caught it. The audience noticed. Confidence leaked out of him, replaced by something sharper. Doubt. Still, pride demanded one more attempt. He set his feet, drew power from his legs, and hurled a straight right meant to erase the round. Chuck's answer was surgical. A short right hand down the middle. No wind-up. Only precision. It landed with a crisp crack on the chin. The younger man's head snapped, knees sagging as ropes caught his fall. For an instant, silence. 1,000 phones froze mid-record. Then the arena detonated, noise exploding in all directions. The fighter stumbled to the ropes, blinking through the lights. His corner shouted, but his ears seemed closed. He shook his head too fast, lifted his gloves, forcing the body of a champion to act like one even as the legs betrayed him. Chuck didn't press. He held distance, chest rising slow, eyes steady. The referee hovered near, watching pupils. 5 seconds left. The crowd's chant twisted into prayer, some begging for more, others for mercy. The boy with the bent sign stopped cheering and just stared, as if holding his breath could keep the legend alive. The bell rang, blunt and merciful. The kid staggered back to his corner, gripping the top rope like a lifeline. He dropped onto the stool, missing it first, then finding it, eyes unfocused. A cut man pressed cold metal to his face. He didn't flinch. The camera closed in. A face that had entered the ring young now looked older. The mask of invincibility cracked. Around the arena, the noise had changed. It wasn't celebration. It was disbelief. People asked each other with their eyes, "Did that just happen?" And as the cornermen worked frantically, towels flying, voices urgent, a whisper rippled through the stands and into living rooms across the country. He might not come out for the second round. The bell had saved him, but the damage was written across every muscle of his body. In his corner, the young kickboxer slumped onto the stool, chest rising and falling too fast, sweat streaming down his back like water poured from a jug. His coach leaned in, gripping his shoulders, spitting urgency into his ear. "He's old! You're young! He can't take your pace! Push, push!" The words snapped like a whip, but they didn't land. The fighter's eyes told the truth. His mouth couldn't. The fear had seeped in. On the opposite side of the ring, Chuck sat straight, hands resting loosely on his knees. He didn't sip water, didn't towel off, didn't even acknowledge the noise around him. His gaze fixed on some invisible point ahead, so steady it unnerved even those cheering for him. The calm didn't look like rest. It looked like ownership. The arena was chaos layered on itself. On one side, kids held their "Chuck" posters high, bouncing on their seats with wild joy. Parents filmed them, tears at the corners of their eyes, realizing their children were witnessing something they themselves had once seen in grainy broadcasts decades ago. On the other, clusters of 20-something fans in branded shirts shouted at their champion, their voices desperate, almost pleading, "Come on! He's nothing! Finish it!" Their chants lacked the confidence of the first round. They sounded like people trying to convince themselves. Cameras cut back and forth, capturing the split like a mirror cracked down the middle. Applause thundered against boos, whistles tangled with chants, and above it all was the restless hum of disbelief. Commentators filled the silence with awe they could barely hide. Nobody expected the young champion to look this drained after one round. Look at him. He's breathing heavy. His arms are sluggish. Norris hasn't even broken a sweat. The referee checked the younger fighter, tugging gently at his gloves, peering into his eyes. The kid nodded too quickly, forcing a grin, but his legs betrayed him when he rose, quivering, not from adrenaline, but fatigue. Cameras zoomed in, broadcasting the tremor of knees across the globe. The crowd roared again, half in encouragement, half in alarm. Across the ring, Chuck finally rose. He moved without sound, without urgency, the way a tide moves, inevitable. Even the camera operators hesitated, unsure whether to frame the tired youth gasping for air or the older man standing so still he seemed carved from something heavier than stone. The seconds ticked away. Trainers stepped back. The timekeeper raised his hand. The crowd, sensing the edge of something irreversible, fell into a sudden hush. The air thickened. The sound of the bell was swallowed by a silence so dense it felt dangerous. The fighters advanced. The kickboxer tried to shake life into his limbs, hopping once, twice, forcing his hands high. His grin had collapsed into a thin line of defiance. His chest heaved, breath fogging in the cold air above the ring. From his corner, his coach shouted encouragement, but it was swallowed by the roar of the opposing chants. Chuck's face hadn't changed. No expression, no gesture to reveal his pulse. His calm was heavier than the other man's fury. He walked forward step by deliberate step, eyes fixed, posture unbroken. And the more he didn't show, the more the younger fighter's panic grew. The second bell hung in the air like the opening of a storm. The boy with the bent cardboard sign pressed it against his chest now, whispering something only his father heard. Around them, grown men who had once laughed at the idea of myth in the modern world found themselves standing, hats pressed against their chests, waiting for something they couldn't name. The young champion raised his gloves and forced himself to meet the center of the ring. His legs wobbled, but carried him forward. His glare was full of rage, but beneath it, in the split-second glimpses the cameras caught, was something sharper, crueler to carry. The knowledge that he had already seen his best work dissolve into silence, and as he closed the distance, every eye in the building locked on the one truth no commentary could disguise. The second round might not just decide the fight. It might decide whether he still believed in himself at all. The bell sounded again, but this time the noise that followed was different. It wasn't pure excitement anymore. It was a collective unease, like a crowd realizing the story they expected had started to twist. The young champion lunged forward on instinct, desperate to prove control. His fists flew in flurries, His kicks snapped loud against the canvas air, but the rhythm had changed. The snap lacked venom. The combinations rushed, shoulders tightening before impact. His power was there, but scattered, misfired. Chuck made it look effortless. He slipped punches without a hitch in breath, let kicks whistle past his ribs, and pivoted with the economy of a man conserving energy for something larger than the fight. Once, when the kid tried a looping left hook, Chuck ducked under and reappeared behind him with a half-smile. The arena gasped, laughter even breaking out in pockets. For the younger man, humiliation stung worse than pain. The kid forced a clinch, locking forearms, trying to grind knees into Chuck's body. They wrestled close, sweat mixing, the sound of their breath caught by ringside mics. And then, quiet but clear, Chuck spoke. "You're not fighting me. You're fighting yourself." The crowd froze. For a moment, even the chants died. The words had landed not just in the fighter's ear, but in every seat of the arena. Viewers at home heard it too. 3 words stripped of bravado, heavy with truth. The young man's face twisted. His eyes, wide with rage, darted back and forth like he wanted to escape his own skull. He pulled back and swung hard, a right hand from the floor, desperate to silence the echo of that sentence. He missed so wide he nearly spun himself off balance, stumbling into the ropes. Chuck stepped forward once and dug a short punch into the body, clean, precise, and merciless. The sound was sickening, the kind that makes a crowd wince in unison. The kid's arms dropped for 2 seconds too long, his mouth gaping for breath. Chuck didn't follow. He simply stepped back, giving him the space to decide whether pride or air mattered more. Commentators scrambled to describe it. "That wasn't just physical," one muttered. "That was psychological. He's breaking him from the inside out." The crowd felt it too. Silence spread like oil across water. For the first time, cheers weren't unified. Some shouted desperately for the young fighter to rise, to strike, to prove. Others sat back in stunned awe, realizing they were watching a man unravel in real time. The kid tried again, throwing himself forward with a kick meant to split the guard. But his timing was gone. Chuck leaned barely an inch, letting the shin pass close enough to ruffle his hair. When the kid landed awkwardly, Chuck's eyes flicked to him, calm as ever. That glance cut deeper than any punch. Rage carried the champion into another wild combination. His fists blurred, but his feet tangled. Each miss drained him. Each dodge by Chuck painted him smaller in the ring. His punches no longer spoke of dominance. They spoke of a boy begging to be taken seriously. Chuck began to move differently now. Not faster, not harder, but lighter, as if gravity tugged less on him than on anyone else in the building. He parried a jab with a flick of his wrist, redirected a cross with a turn of the shoulder, and made space with a step so clean the kid looked clumsy chasing him. When the young fighter finally caught Chuck against the ropes and unleashed everything left in him, hook, hook, knee, Chuck leaned back, let the strikes skid into nothing, then slipped off the ropes like smoke. The younger man stumbled forward, chest heaving, arms sagging. The older man raised his chin slightly, eyes steady. No sweat streaked his brow. No desperation clung to his movements. He looked like a man in control of the clock, the ring, and perhaps even his opponent's soul. The crowd began to shift again. You could hear it in the rhythm of their voices, an understanding that the fight wasn't equal anymore. The chants of the younger fans grew frantic, almost shrill, while the calls for Chuck sounded lower, heavier, carrying inevitability. Another exchange. The kid swung a desperate overhand right. Chuck caught it on his glove, turned his hips, and delivered a short, snapping counter to the ribs. The younger man folded for a second, arms clutched low. His eyes darted toward his corner, searching for guidance that wasn't coming. Chuck's face remained unreadable. But to everyone watching, it was clear. He wasn't just avoiding defeat. He was teaching. Every dodge, every counter, every quiet word whispered in the clinch became a lesson carved into his opponent's pride. By the final minute of the round, the younger fighter's body sagged, shoulders heavy, legs sluggish. His punches came slower, less certain, while Chuck looked untouched, as if the bout hadn't yet begun for him. The commentators said what the crowd was already thinking. He's breaking. Look at his eyes. He knows it. And in those eyes, caught by the camera for millions to see, was a mix of fury and despair. The look of a man realizing strength alone wasn't enough. The round ticked toward its end, but the question was no longer who had the upper hand. It was whether the young champion could hold himself together long enough to hear the bell. The bell rang to close the second round, but the sound felt less like a pause and more like a warning. The crowd roared in fractured voices, some screaming Chuck's name like a hymn, others howling for the younger fighter to prove he still belonged. The air inside the arena felt thick, almost metallic, heavy with the smell of sweat, canvas dust, and adrenaline. Every camera lens zoomed in, every eye locked on the two men. In the challenger's corner, the young champion slumped onto his stool, chest jerking with ragged gulps. His coach shouted directly into his ear, words that mixed urgency with desperation. "He's old. He's slow. Push him. Break him." But the kid's eyes betrayed him. They were glassy, wandering, and for the first time he looked less like a fighter and more like a boy staring down a truth he wasn't ready to accept. Across the ring, Chuck remained standing. No stool, no water, no towel draped over his shoulders. He leaned on the ropes with the calm posture of a man waiting for an elevator. Sweat barely touched his brow, his chest rose evenly, and he looked not at his opponent, but somewhere beyond, as though already thinking about the next movement, the next choice. His silence was heavier than any war cry. The referee hovered in the center, eyes darting between the corners. The seconds ticked down. The crowd's noise climbed like a storm closing over a city. The bell cracked again. Round 3. The champion stood, legs trembling but still defiant, and stumbled forward. His fists lifted, but they looked less like weapons and more like a plea. Pride carried him, not strength. He lunged with a jab, sloppy, arm overextended. Chuck slipped it with the smallest of turns, almost casual, and countered with a straight hand to the body that folded the kid in half. The sound was brutal. Flesh on bone, air forced from lungs, and the arena gasped as one. The champion staggered back, mouth open, eyes wide. His guard dropped for 2 fatal seconds. Chuck didn't chase. He stepped in just enough, delivered a short right hook across the cheek, and followed with a perfectly timed left. The younger man's knees buckled. Gravity made the final decision. He collapsed onto one knee, glove pressed against the canvas, head hanging. The referee's voice thundered above the chaos. 1, 2! Each number hit like a drumbeat. The cameras zoomed so close you could see the fighter's lips tremble. His corner screamed at him to rise, to breathe, to hold on. The crowd fractured. Children with handmade signs jumped wildly, convinced they had seen history, while his fans shouted his name in voices already edged with panic. 3, 4. He tried. One glove planted, then a knee, then heaved himself half up. His legs shook violently, almost folding again. Sweat poured down his back, dripping onto the mat, like the last grains in an hourglass. He found the ropes, clung to them as if they were the only solid thing left. 5, 6. The referee leaned close, eyes sharp, ready to decide if bravery and foolishness had become the same thing. Chuck stood in his corner, arms relaxed, face unreadable. He hadn't moved since landing the final blow. His expression carried no glee, no pity, just patience. 7, 8. The champion's corner erupted in noise. His trainer pounded the mat. Cutmen screamed his name. A hand hovered dangerously near the white towel. But the kid lifted his chin, wiped blood from his lip, and forced himself upright on legs that barely listened. He swayed, then steadied, glaring through swollen eyes at the only man he couldn't intimidate. The referee barked, "Walk to me." The fighter staggered forward, each step like crossing broken glass. He reached the ref, hands up, insisting he was fine. The crowd howled, not in cheers, but in disbelief that he was still standing. The bell clanged again, ending the round before the ref made his call. A wave of noise crashed down, half relief, half outrage. Doctors leapt onto the apron, pressing into the young man's corner with flashlights and cold instruments. His coach shouted orders over the chaos, but his fighter barely heard him, blinking against the penlight. Chuck didn't sit. He stayed on his feet, steady, his gaze locked across the ring as if to remind everyone that he wasn't finished. His breathing never changed. His presence alone felt like a verdict waiting to be delivered. The commentators scrambled for words. One stammered, "He's breaking down physically, mentally too. This isn't just a fight anymore." The other cut in, voice lower. "This is pride versus time." And pride looks tired in the stands. The boy with the crooked sign pressed it to his chest. His father's hand gripped his shoulder, both of them silent, eyes glued to the ring. Back in the corner, the champion gripped his coach's wrist as the towel hovered higher. His voice cracked, but came out clear enough. "Don't! Not like this!" The doctor leaned toward the referee, muttering something lost in the roar. The ref's brow furrowed, his hand rising as though ready to wave it off. The coach froze between obedience and loyalty. The crowd leaned forward as one body, thousands holding their breath. And then, silence. Thick, unbearable silence. The referee raised his arm. The coach's hand tightened on the towel. The doctor shouted another word. The cameras zoomed, catching every detail of a young man's face on the brink of either redemption or collapse. The moment stretched, cruelly long, until the entire arena carried one question in the same unspoken voice. Would the bell ring for another round? Or had a career, and maybe a legend's myth, just ended in that corner?